Good morning, everyone. Welcome. We'll just wait a minute or two while folks join us online. We're thrilled to have you with us for our How Do You Measure Belonging Healthy Aging core webinar today. Welcome. And as you're settling in and joining us, just inviting you, if you feel comfortable doing so, to take a moment to introduce yourself in chat. And if you'd like, share your name, your pronouns, your organizational affiliation if you want to, as well as the lands you're calling in from and a question that you would like addressed in our hour together today. My name is Olivia Bornick. I'm the Assistant Director for Community Engagement within the Healthy Aging team at United Way BC. And once again, welcome to everyone who's joining us online today. We're together for about an hour for a webinar hosted and presented by Jessie Sutherland, who I'll introduce in a few moments. And the topic today that we'll be exploring together is how do you measure belonging? I'd like to just formally open our space and time together with a land acknowledgement. So I am hosting this webinar and calling in today from the ancestral, traditional, and stolen lands of the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Musqueam nations. As an organization, United Way BC acknowledges the homelands of the many Indigenous peoples in this place that is colonially known as BC today. Just a reminder again, if you haven't done so already, take a moment to introduce yourself in chat. Everyone will remain muted during the webinar. And we will take a few moments for a brief question and answer period at the end. So if you do have questions as we move through the topic today, we invite you to share them either in the Q&A function, which you'll find at the bottom in the middle of your Zoom webinar screen, or you can also use chat. And as a reminder, when you are posting either introductions or questions in chat, please do send them to everyone and not just the hosts and panelists. That will enable others on the call to get a sense of what questions or comments are being shared by others who have joined us in the context of the webinar today. Also, just finally, a reminder that if you do have any, if there are questions that we don't get to in the context of the webinar, our guest speaker, Jessie, will do her best to respond as part of a follow-up that we'll be sending out after the webinar. We are recording today's session. So for those of you, if you have colleagues or friends who weren't able to join, there will be a recording posted out on our website, the Healthy Aging Core BC website. We'll also make slides available and additional materials connected to the webinar that will be sent out via email in the next couple of days. With that, I am delighted to turn the microphone and the screen over to our guest speaker, Jessie Sutherland, who's with us today. Just to give you a little bit of information about Jessie, and I know she'll take a moment to introduce herself as well, but Jessie is the founding director of Intercultural Strategies and the award-winning Belonging Matters framework. She is an international speaker, trainer, and consultant who works with organizations and communities to engage diversity, to build belonging, and to ignite intercultural collaboration. Her work has been delivered in over 8 languages and has taken her across Canada and around the world to support communities in their efforts to address challenging issues, including workplace inclusion, poverty, homelessness, the overdose crisis, elder abuse, reconciliation, youth engagement, and more. Jessie is also the recipient of the BC Community Achievement Award in 2023 for her innovative approach to creating sustainable community change efforts that address complex social problems. It really is a joy and a delight to have you with us today, Jessie. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. And I will turn it over to you now.
Thank you so much, Olivia, and to all of the United Way of BC team. It's always wonderful to collaborate together, and really thrilled to be on the line with so many people dedicated to building belonging with older adults and in their communities. So thanks to everyone for taking the time. And I'm thrilled to be calling from Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish territories, and am very thrilled that we are in an era where there's such deep and genuine collaboration that is possible in this particular era we're in. So what I thought I would do for our hour together is basically, this is the quick agenda, welcome and introductions. I'll do an introduction to measuring belonging, which is a topic that's dear to my heart and happy to share it. A bit of application and discussion, and let you know a little bit about the full Measure and Accelerate Belonging Principles-Focused Evaluation Toolkit program for those that are interested, and we'll just have a brief closing. So does that sound like an all right way to go about? I do encourage you to write. I don't get to see people in a webinar. So if you go in the chat, I'll be looking. So I'm hoping that this is an agreeable way to move forward for our hour together. If not, put it in the chat. So a little bit of background about the Belonging Matters framework. It is a community development process. It is my life's work. And basically it started in the senior sector, older adult, older person sector that we are now calling it. And one of the things that is so wonderful for me is I am now a senior as of not too long ago, and part of seniors pickleball now. I remember when pickleball first started, I was helping resolve conflicts between tennis folks and pickleball folks, and here I am in the thick of things. So basically what the framework does is foster a sense of belonging. It provides a really useful process for engaging older adults and anyone that uses the framework for service improvement, as well as generating older adult-led self-organizing projects to address whatever the priority challenge is. And it's really useful to engage diverse cultures, viewpoints, and sectors so that we can all work in a genuinely collaborative way. So that's a little bit about the background, and that is where the evaluation tools have been built out. So I thought it was important for you to know. And I also wanted to acknowledge how important the United Way of BC and the whole older adult sector has been in the development of the framework. So just briefly, the United Way was the absolute first funder back in when the idea came for the Belonging Matters framework and community change process back in 2006. And we've had a great collaboration through the years, including a regional elder financial abuse awareness dialogue project, some older adults in isolation projects. For those that have been around long enough, I helped with the facilitation of the initial consultations for Better at Home back then. I believe it was called Community Action for Seniors Independence. And it's evolved to see and worked with the Better at Home and et cetera, et cetera. So I won't go through the whole list of collaboration, but really grateful to continue to be paddling together in this important work. And just to also acknowledge everyone on the line who likely was involved in one way or another in the development of the framework. So these are some of the places that have been involved in the older adult sector. There's been elders and seniors, older adult mapping projects, stuff on affordable housing, newcomer refugee, 2S LGBTQI+, poverty, love fraud, you name it. It's developed over the years between about 2000 and 2015. And within the first 5 or 6 years, it had reached 2.5 million people just within the senior sector, because it ignites this longing for home in a way and building belonging, and older adults would then lead self-organizing projects to make a difference in their communities. And in 2015, the Council to Reduce Elder Abuse funded us to go back to all the participants and host agencies to do focus groups and come up with some sustainability tools to help scale it, to help people scale it. So I wanted to share that because the senior sector has been critical in its evolution, and now it's reaching all sorts of sectors on all sorts of topics. And part of why I wanted to mention this is because I want to offer one of the tools that came out of it. Musqueam hosted an Indigenous leaders focus group on how to scale this framework within Indigenous communities. And so there is a checklist. I put it in bold within that came out of that on Indigenous engagement checklist. So for those that want to access it, there's the link that's right there, reconciliationtools.ca, and you can download. And that really did come from work with the senior sector. So I thought I would mention that, but a whole bunch of other things came out of that. Where we're at now is really helping organizations build their own in-house capacity to use this framework and build belonging from the inside out to empower folks to be leaders of change in their own lives. So there's basically 3 blocks of learning, and that's where the measure belonging falls in. We always start with teams because we know how important team cohesion, and if we're walking the talk, so how important that is before we work in a change initiative to invite others. And the next is build your belonging strategy, and piece of that is the measure belonging. So once we have a strategy and engagement plan, then how to integrate the evaluation tools, and I'll be getting to that very soon. And then how to implement this strategy, and we do that through the Belonging Matters Facilitator training, which works with folks with lived experience and goes through a process so they generate their own initiatives to lead the change. And so that's a few of the pieces that where the Belonging Matters framework and what we're going to learn today is nestled. So I'll be sharing what we've learned in terms of the evaluation toolkit and give you some nuggets there. But before we dive into measure belonging, I would love to hear from everyone. So if you can go in the chat, or even, I don't know if people can unmute themselves and say it out loud. Oh, actually, sorry, it's in the word cloud. There's going to be a link that Olivia is going to share. And just to let me know, your one-word answer to what does belonging mean to you?
So my colleague Ravi has posted in chat a link, and those of you who are able to click on that link should be able to populate your response to what belonging means to you in that Mentimeter link. And what we'll see is a word cloud emerge as folks insert their responses. If that is tricky, or you can't click on that link or have access to the Mentimeter file, please feel free to put your responses directly in chat as well. Thanks.
And throughout the webinar, I'll be asking questions. There's one of 2 times it'll be word cloud, but I invite people always to also write it in the chat so that I can respond to what's most important to folks on the call. I love it. Look at all this. Connection, inclusion, human connection, shared understanding, trust, community, together. Awesome. I love it. That's wonderful. Honesty, familiarity, interest and value. Beautiful. So you'll let me know, Ravi, if there's any others coming in, or if it's friends. So important. So, as these are all coming up, I'll share a little bit about what belonging means to me, and then share some of what I've learned from older adults over the years. The whole Belonging Matters framework, the guiding principle is that at the heart of any people problem, you're going to find a group of people who feel pushed out. So belonging is a 2-way relationship, a multi-diverse relationship, where on the one hand, the people that feel pushed out have their journey to assert their own belonging through asserting their voice, dignity, and leadership, and a bunch of other things, having the radical courage to trust again And on the other hand, the rest of the community, and especially system influencers, learn to listen in new ways and not just cry, but act on what they hear so that together we can collaborate on co-designing and implementing the change. And I know this because I was born into the foster care system and have experienced being pushed out of systems and networks of people. And after about 15 years of working on different social problems, I was so attuned to the people with lived experience, and it was very easy for me to support their voice, dignity, and leadership and create the Belonging Matters conversations process that then leads to people generating innovative ideas to lead the change. And not as easy at first to realize how much the frame of everyone else in the community doesn't see all the scaffolding needed to make that possible. And so over the years, I've combined my lived experience, the work that I've done in the communities, and research. And so by the time it went in 2007 into neighborhood projects, we started asking these questions to older adults, and I thought I would share a little bit about that. So thanks everyone for sharing these pieces. I love that togetherness and happiness that came in just now as well. So I will share my screen so we can take a look at some of what, in the Belonging Matters conversations, which is one of the pieces to the Belonging Matters process. When we start talking about belonging, we actually, I just have to, a message came up on my screen. Okay, we actually start with the concept of home, and part of why we do home, it's a little bit of a bigger container than belonging. It taps into people's longing. We all have a longing to belong, but also a longing for home, especially when we're in big transitions, like when we age and all sorts of different junctures in our lives. So here are some of what people said. This was the Musqueam elders said, home is when you know your language. This was a group of actually newcomer older adults. Home is where you can be yourself. This was Spanish-speaking elders. Home is where there is music. This is an Iraqi refugee group. Home is you and I. This was at Community 2S LGBTQIA+. Home is where I can be myself. It is my sanctuary. This group went on to addressing homophobia in senior care homes. Home is where I played mahjong. These were all Chinese, Canadian older adults that led to some intergenerational pieces. So of course, there was a lot of other things that come up just around belonging. But one of the reasons we always start with home is that piece that I mentioned, but also I have found it is the most effective way at getting at cultural and worldview differences around home. And that if we can engage people on that level, then we're getting full engagement in the process. And also it uncovers and the different worldviews that we know what we're building together. So I'm curious, and if you could just say it either out loud or in the chat, why does belonging matter in the work that you do? What are some of the problems that happen if there isn't? What is some of the good things when there is belonging? Just a few answers, so if somebody can be brave and bold. Anyone going to type something in? Ooh, I see some other things from before. Security, connections, empowerment. Yeah, it can lead to isolation and depression. In doing these Belonging Matters conversations, the level of self-neglect that can happen, we can all see that can happen if we don't have a sense of belong. The impact on our health, how we feel about ourselves, our sense of worthiness. And for teams, someone says it makes more productive teams. And just the severe, it can lead to violence and how much somebody is writing we need connection as human beings. So more healthy mentally and holistically. So these are some of the reasons that belonging matters. So we're not talking about fluff, and therefore the importance that we know how to know what is really fostering belonging and what isn't. And someone wrote, to preventing the creeping menace of xenophobia, incentive to join social activities. Yeah, it's so good. So these are all really excellent reasons why belonging matters. And then there's roadblocks to building that sense of belonging. And if anyone wants to share theirs in this, what you see, some of the roadblocks in your own context for belonging amongst and between older adults and the rest of the community, go for it. I'm just going to touch on three or four brief ones. So I have a picture of fried fish, because this was actually one of the very first Belonging Matters conversations way back when. It was a BC Housing mixed housing unit. And as we were talking about what builds home and erodes a sense of home, one older adult said, "Oh, fried fish really gives me a sense of home, so I'm always frying fish and aromatizing the housing unit so everyone can have a sense of home." And somebody said, "Actually, that erodes a sense of home for me. It like stinks and all that kind of stuff." So just having this conversation shifted what was starting to lead to some xenophobia within the housing unit. So when we go at the home piece, what are the different, when people become aware of each other's sense of home, that they can become more aware. And the other piece of the roadblock is how seniors or older adult serving staff and teams might respond to cultural differences. So on the left is a group of Iranian older adults, and what creates a sense of home for them is their relationship with and belonging with rivers. So we were organizing a trip to a local river on the North Shore. And at the last second, the host agency just said, "No, you can't go to a river, but you can go to Lonsdale Key." So not understanding that how important trust is and how important worldviews are, and really listening to exactly what's been said and acting on what we hear. So sometimes that can be a roadblock. And then there's the belonging within families. This is a group of Afghan elders who were looking at family financial abuse. So the roadblock is the erosion of the role of the elder in the family. And over here is connecting them to service providers. And many never wanted to reach out to police. So the trust in the community. So the reason that I'm putting these roadblocks out, because belonging might seem simple and we all know that, but how hard it can actually be. And that at the heart of many of these issues, you will find one group of people imposing their worldview over another, and how important that piece of being aware of worldviews and how we're going to measure it and how we're going to build belonging. So is there any thoughts that are coming? Not being encouraged to give ideas? Yes. Costs, mobility, all of those pieces are such key roadblocks to building a genuine culture of belonging. Again, if there's questions coming up or you need anything more specifically, feel free to put it in the chat and I will integrate it as we go or follow up later. So we have a sense of all the different, so we've touched on what belonging means to people, why it matters, what are some of the roadblocks that you encounter. And so we've all been born into these systems. And now we have a choice of whether we're going to replicate these systems or innovate new pathways forward. And I think everyone here on the call is interested in innovating the new pathways forward. So sometimes when I frame what are we changing, which is really key if we're going to measure a change, is we're moving from, hopefully, systems of exclusion to cultures of belonging. And sometimes I frame that as relationships of mutuality. So when we're thinking about change and measuring change, it's important to understand what are the ingredients you need for a change effort to be successful. And I'm just going to dive in here with 3 key areas that's important. And the first is you need a theory of change. You kind of need to know, what am I changing anyhow? And so change efforts can fail if there's an inconsistent, incoherent, or non-existent theory of change. So we'll see that a lot. A lot of companies, organizations during COVID just started throwing diversity training at people, but they didn't start with a theory of change. So it's just sort of a hodgepodge of things. So if you don't have a theory of change, that is really critical. You need a theory of change with really good guiding principles. And I'll tell you why in just a minute. And the second reason change efforts fail is the implementation. And you need a theory of change to be able to put your theory of change to test. And about 80% of change efforts fail because they're not actually implementing their theory of change well. And they fail for that reason. And the third success factor is whether you are collecting evidence. So success relies on sufficient evidence to be collected to determine the effectiveness of the theory of change and implementation of outcome. So this is where we are landing right now, this is the piece that the measurement comes. And that's why I wanted to start with this, because the rest of what I'm going to say follows from this. All the evaluation tools are built around the theory of change and the implementation activities. So, just out of curiosity, if anyone could put in the chat, I would love it. Thinking of your own organization and the change work that you're doing, or just the services you're providing, if you could measure belonging, how would it help you? What information would it give you that would be helpful? If you people can be courageous and put something in the chat, then I feel like I'm engaging with people. Anyone gonna write something in the chat, or can people unmute themselves as well, or no?
The webinar context, they count, Jessie.
Oh, okay, thanks. Oh, the question is, thank you, Carol Ann. If you could measure a sense of belonging, how would it help you? So we're all here to get data, learn about how to measure belonging. So how are you hoping this will help you? Yes, to ensure my services are able to reach all people. Fabulous. It's so important. So I'll just go through a few of the things. Legitimizes the need to have a focus on belonging as more than a soft yes. So important goal, more typical. Getting feedback from attendees. Okay, fabulous. Thank you. And future planning. So basically, people have said about everything I was going to say if it wasn't said. When we can measure belonging, then we can be confident about knowing what is working and what isn't, so that we can course correct it, which will allow us to stop spending money, time, and resources on what's not working. And, when we measure belonging, collect all the information, course correct, and things are working, then we actually have the information we need to gain supports to scale your efforts across departments, organization, regions, contexts, whatever it is. So we all know funders, or if an organization already has funding, you still have to convince different people in different hierarchies why something is working and ready to scale. So this can help in that way as well. And the other piece that I love about the way of measuring belonging that I'm going to be sharing with you is this way is really rooted in the theory of change and the guiding principles. And the evaluation tools is not another thing to do on top of what you're doing, but actually embedding reflective learning practices throughout your change initiative. So people are going from espoused values and agreed principles to starting to internalize them so they show up in attitudes and behaviors. I'm sure many people have been a part of diversity training And there's all these aha moments, but attitudes and behaviors don't change. So this is a way that you can measuring belonging through the principles focused evaluation methodology that I'll share with you helps you know what's working, what needs course correcting, but also gives you a tool to help everyone start to internalize the values and principles that are important to you in your theory of change. And also I have found, because we embed those reflective learning practices, it really strengthens collaboration. And we all know to build genuine cultures of belonging where people are connected with each other, but also the services and programs and opportunities in the community, we need collaborative approaches. And this methodology really accelerates and strengthens collaborative practices and ultimately increases your impact. I've been integrating these evaluation tools into the Belonging Matters initiatives for about 6 years now, and it's just out of this world how it went from very great impact, but even more so once these tools were impacted. So these are some of the reasons to measure belonging. So now we get to the punchline here. Are you ready? How do you measure belonging? How do people measure belonging? Okay, it's great. It can help my colleagues be more inclusive. Yeah. Okay, are you ready to learn about how to measure belonging? Oh, here I'm just going to, yes, and also the other thing, people start leaving if you don't belong, don't feel respected. Okay, learn about the effective. Okay, yeah, great. So how do you measure belonging? And this is where I get to the principles focused piece. You know, when we think about other evaluation models, or really when we're thinking about any change process, let me take it to that level. We are in times of great change, as we all know. So any 5-year plan that we create likely will be thrown out the window at some time. Whether it's a pandemic, natural disaster, economic downturn, whatever it is, we're in some people call it a polycrisis. That's when there's multiple big changes in the world that are happening at the same time. So when we have in traditional evaluation tools are created, the beginning, and then you summarize things at the end, but likely things are going to change during the process. So what's great about principles-focused evaluation is that it's rooted in your theory of change and the work and the guiding principles for your work. So when things change, I kind of often use it as a metaphor like a dragon boat, because we're on the West Coast, that the principles are the rudder to our change effort. And when we hit, so if we agree to the principles at the beginning, where we're headed, we're leaving the system of exclusion, if we want to put it that way, and headed towards a culture of belonging. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but we know we're headed. And if we agree on the principles, then when we hit rough waters or there's decisions to be made or the world changes, then we go back to those principles and draw on those principles to make decisions. And so the 3 initial steps for creating tools to measure belonging are the following. The first is getting clear on your theory of change and ensuring whatever the agreed upon guiding principles are, that they're measurable. And we do this like in the Belonging Matters framework. We have the guiding principles for those most impacted. So in this case, in your case, it's like the older adults. What are the guiding principles to build their voice, dignity, and leadership, to support their radical courage to trust again, to have the courage to express opinions if they've been pushed to the side for a long time. There's a whole bunch of guiding principles that we've come to. And what we've done is we've ensured that they're actionable, that they're verbs, that they can be measurable, so that they're not just fluff, they're actual actions that can be measured. And we've done the same for the rest of the community. So to what extent, for example, do I listen and actually act on what I hear instead of listening and showing compassion, but then just going on as usual? Or to what extent am I, sharing decision making with the people, the experts, the people there's all these pieces, so that's coming to action verbs related to the guiding principles. So when we do support people in their strategy, we go into bigger detail with them to look at the Belonging Matters theory of change to see what works for people and resonates and what needs, customizing and streamlining. But the first piece is getting clear on your theory of change and having measurable guiding principles. And the second piece is creating reflective learning practices. So in a change effort, it's identifying those key areas for what I call reflective as well as retrospective learning practices to create your evaluation instruments. And what I mean by retrospective, in traditional evaluation, we often have pre and post surveys. So the beginning of a project, if it was belonging, it might be to what extent do you feel a sense of belonging, or it might be about listening or trust or whatever it is. And then at the end, to what extent? Well, in this methodology, actually, concepts like belonging, you might find the post-survey is worse, even if it was very successful. Because when you truly understand what it entails to listen, for example, the beginning at a pre-survey, you might think you're a great listener as a staff person. But once you learn everything that listening entails, listening for worldviews, listening for older adult strengths, listening for how to support their voice and dignity, all those pieces, then at the end of the process, you might actually say you're not that great a listener. So it looks like it went down, but really the person is a better listener. So that's why in this methodology with principles, change efforts that are guided by principles, it's really important to create retrospective. So when I think back to the beginning, where was I, into now? So those are the pieces. So the reflective learning practices, thinking of who's involved in this process and what reflective practices can we create. So with a team, it might be monthly culture of belonging temperature checks and creating reflective practice that the team goes through. There might be, in our process, there's some for facilitator trainings that are learning how to listen in new ways so that they grab hold of the most important pieces and amplify, support the voice and leadership of older adults. And same with folks with lived experience, so in this case, older adults. So identifying the key groups involved and then creating the reflective learning practices that help them deepen the learning of what we're in the change that we're going through, but also can be collected as data. So that's the second step to measure belonging. And the third is the tricky one. And I think we can all know, how do you measure behavior change? It's one thing to have brain candy and reflect on things, but how do you measure behavior change? So traditionally, evaluation has surfaced all the difficulties in a change effort or in an organization. And so a methodology for unearthing the positive, transformative stories, so not just the small changes, more like caterpillar to butterfly change. So someone, let's say, that's totally isolated and at risk of elder abuse to someone that's very connected and able to assert their voice and rights or access services. So we're looking for the caterpillar transformation pieces. And so there is a methodology called Most Significant Change Stories that is basically a 5-question interview process that can be customized to different cultural contexts that can get at that measuring behavior change, the sort of transformative pieces. So those are the 3 pieces that I thought would be helpful in this journey of starting to look at how to measure belonging. And I have found them to be quite powerful. A few years ago, I was the project lead for the overdose crisis in my town, and we integrated in the 40 stakeholder interagency meeting these reflective learning practices. So you had substance users, chief of police, health authority, all sorts of folks, nonprofit leaders, power differentials, huge. And when we integrated this learning practice, reflective learning practice, once a month, we went from low trust. We could do a temperature check on where was the trust in the group, where was the sense of belonging in the group. And just by doing the reflective practices, and then at the next meeting, I would summarize where we were at in terms of our culture of belonging by collating the data and having a dialogue about it so that the group is brainstorming the solutions. The level of collaboration was night and day within just 3 meetings. So I'm a big fan of this process that was really created by Michael Quinn Patton, who created principles-focused evaluation. So I thought I would pause here to leave some space for questions and comments, because I have given pretty high level thinking here, and I'm not sure how much people need more concrete examples or if you have specific questions. So I'd invite people to go into the chat and let me know how this is landing, if there's anything that needs clarifying, or any questions that are burbling up.
Jessie, while we give folks a chance to reflect a little bit and weigh in, one question I think that comes up for me in the space of evaluation, there's lots of language we use around evaluation, and I love the invitation to reflect on what principle-focused evaluation might look like in our workplaces and in our change efforts. In your experience, how is principle-focused evaluation the same as or connected to developmental evaluation approaches and theories? Like, are those one and the same? Are they different? How do they sit next to each other or nest together? I'm curious to hear some thoughts around that in this context of measuring and assessing for and striving towards these cultures and spaces of belonging.
Yes, great question. So principles-focused evaluation can be nestled within developmental evaluation. I think across the board, people are more committed to realizing that all our change efforts are emergent because we're in such changing contexts. If we're not using an evaluation approach that is more emergent and based on principles, we probably won't get very far because we'll be collecting information that we can't necessarily use or doesn't reflect the whole process. So often principles-focused evaluation is nestled within, is side by side, is sort of can be seen as part of as well.
Thank you. And a question just from Terrence was whether you could take some of this higher level theory, Jessie, and nest it within a case study or a story of, I mean, you did share that example at the end around some of the reflective practices you were bringing into this multi-stakeholder partner group grappling with challenges connected to the opioid crisis. Other stories or case studies or organizations or multi-stakeholder planning tables you've maybe worked alongside that have tested this and struggled with it and applied it in different ways?
Yeah, I think there's 2 pieces I can say. So that piece around the piece that I didn't say, Terrence, that I think might be helpful to tease out a little bit more is these reflective learning practice in that interagency table. It's 9 questions that we've collaborated. We've already got the very beginning. We have established what this group's theory of change is. Pretty much they adopted the Belonging Matters framework once they went through things, and then we tweaked some of the guiding principles so they're measurable, created 9 reflective learning practices that everyone agreed to, and it really took people just 2 minutes to fill at the end of every monthly meeting. And the next day I would do, or the next meeting, start with a temperature check. And so I think the piece that might be helpful is to hear what the debrief is like. So I would say 70% feel like they're a part of the group, 30% don't. 80% feel like they can trust each other, 20 don't. Whatever it was. So as a group, what do you do when you feel like you're a part of something and a group and 30% don't? What are things you can do to build belonging? And people generate ideas. And then so when you're in a group and don't feel part of it, how do you assert your belonging? And then people generate ideas. So it takes the pressure off whoever's facilitating, chairing, to micromanage relationships, putting out fire, to group problem solving, so that everyone has agency around that. So that's just one example. And the other piece I'll do is around older adults. So in a project with older adults that had literacy, were not necessarily literate in any language. They may speak 5 languages or 2 or 3 or whatever, but there is literacy and translation and different issues like that. What we did is we turned the retrospective questions. So where did they start around sense of connectedness and belonging, and where are they now? At the end of the project, with a graphic facilitator and a interpreter, so that the evaluation answers were drawn. So how to make evaluation accessible, fun, relatable, and give you the information. So that helped them deepen all the learning that they went through as an older adult, because you're reviewing things in a way as you go through the process, but then it also gives you information about what worked and what needs course correcting. And another tool throughout the process is things like right after any kind of event or any kind of programming, having quick reflective learning questions for folks with lived experience. So in this case, older adults. And what I love about this process is that it really captures things that you're not expecting, because the umbrella questions are so large. So if your goal is connectedness, it might not be tell us the ways you feel more connected, or whatever it is that people might write, but more, what is your takeaway and what are you going to do about it? Or what are you going to do as a result of it? So that we end up capturing, if nobody says what the intended goal was, then maybe this isn't what it's about. And if all these other unintended outcomes happen, with one group, there was a woman who felt so worthless. She was considering suicide, and the outcome was she wanted to live and she felt like she was worthwhile. So those are just a couple of examples. And is there any other question for people that are monitoring the chat, I should address before?
Yeah, I've been taking a look, Jessie, and I'm happy to
Okay.
feed some too. I do want to address just a question that Carol Ann put in chat around a question around whether United Way BC has a template to measure change. It's a really good question, Carol Ann, and certainly through the new service delivery model that the Healthy Aging team at United Way BC has been rolling out. And we're just in the granting process right now. So some of you on the call may have been involved in submitting grant applications for additional funding through our Healthy Aging programming. We are developing, and it will be shared out in the next couple of weeks with the broader community across the province, a theory of change model connected to that healthy aging vision and some impact statements within there. I've seen some other, so that will be shared out. That's forthcoming, absolutely. I've seen some other comments or questions and suggestions, actually, and I think they're really interesting around with a theory of change. Identifying some common questions, right? Or identifying some common indicators, evaluation questions, maybe that might help us as a collective CBSS sector in the province get at some of these questions around connection, around belonging, around What does it look like for older adults to live and thrive independently in ways that are nested by and held by communities? So I think I'm happy to bring that back to our team at United Way and think that through a little bit more. As I said, that theory of change model will be shared out publicly in the coming few weeks as we roll out some of this new funding through the service delivery model. So thanks for that. A couple of questions, Jessie, around if you can you spoke to this a little bit, but you've spoken about some of these 9 core questions. Could you share 1 or 2 examples of what those questions are, or?
Yeah, I think I'm on the top of my head in the full program that's starting in April. It has all the examples and samples of every single tool so people can customize. And when I think about those 9 questions, really I love about it so much is it gets customized to each group. So for example, I mentioned that because there was going to be such low trust, there was going to be trust there. You have people that were arrested by the other people on the on the table. So there's going to be trust. So you want to have something to find out how much people trust each other and this kind of thing. But you can customize it to whatever you as a chair or a group are finding hard. So after 3 months, once we resolved to a certain point, we shifted up the questions. And one of the things was, to what extent am I following through on my commitments? To what extent is the rest of the group following through on their to what extent am I showing up on time? Whatever it is, you can kind of customize to wherever the group is going. And I've even done things. With this particular project, the very first day, one of the stakeholders took me aside and said, "It's great you were hired, but just so you know, we've been meeting 10 years and never moved into action." That was a great heads up. So I was able to create reflective learning practices around decision making. And one of them partway through was, to what extent do I want to make a decision today? To what extent do I just want to keep having meetings and never make a decision? I'm making it up, right? It was more sophisticated than that. And it turned out 3 people love meetings and never want to get to decisions. So there's ways to start moving people along and making explicit what is sort of the undercurrent of a thing. So those are just some of the examples that come top to mind.
Thanks, Jessie. I do just want to share that Michelle had shared some interesting thoughts in chat too around just speaking to how measures of connection can sometimes be a proxy for belonging or sense of community. So Michelle had shared that, we see as folks identify new and deeper connections with neighbors, they also tend to rate their sense of belonging higher. So within their organization or their context and space, they use metrics like numbers of neighbors you can greet using their first name,
Nice.
numbers of neighbors you would be comfortable borrowing a cup of sugar from, degree to which you have an increased sense of your shared strengths and gifts in your building or
I
on your
love
street.
it. These
So
are great questions.
So some great thoughts shared by Michelle in chat there too. Another question, Jessie, as well, is at the beginning, you provided an example about the framework being used in a seniors housing space and context, and wondering if you had other examples of strategies that emerged to address belonging in the context of seniors housing.
Well, what was interesting in this, and this is more to do with Belonging Matters conversations than the measurement piece, so I'll try and be succinct here. When we believe the people most impacted are the experts, they are going to come up with the ideas, but not in the typical brainstorm way. When we go through the lens of belonging, this is where the knife goes in when we felt pushed out. So just as an example, in one of the mixed housing units, it was mental health, substance use, and older adults. This is a few years back. And they wanted the Belonging Matters conversations because there was low engagement amongst the older adults. But when we did the Belonging Matters conversations, what emerged was love fraud, that all the women had been conned by a man and pretty much bedded and then ditched as soon as they were. And so what ended up coming up is they came up with visual legacies and education tools to alert all different ages of women about love fraud and how to prevent it. So it was the 10 tips you might be dealing with a wolf in sheep's clothing. So often, whatever the presenting problem is, when you actually have the conversations with people who are most impacted and consider them the experts, then they generate something you would never have noticed, possibly from the outside. And just to also build on that tool of an example, I was recently working at a school district on the superintendent level, and the director of Indigenous education said, how can you embed cultural humility in a structure that's transactional? So we just unpacked what are the actions around cultural humility. To what extent do I suspend my judgment before asserting my voice, or to what extent am I aware of my own worldview? To what extent do I listen for and give space to another worldview? So once you get to the action, you can then create the reflective learning tools and start collecting the data. Because in cultural humility, there are some people that need to learn to step back. Oh, and I'm seeing the time, I should get to the ending here. And there's some people that need to create the space for other worldviews, and other people that need to assert and amplify more their worldview to make it culturally inclusive space. So I will answer any other questions that haven't been done, but I'm aware I want to make sure everyone gets what they need. So I'll just give a quick heads up around. In April, I'm teaching with Michael Quinn Patton. We've been working together for 6 years now. He helped build the Belonging Matters Framework Evaluation Toolkit. And then for the last few years, we've been teaching teams around the world. And one of them even won the United Nations Intercultural Innovation Award, and was told it was because of their evaluation tools. And so I have convinced him to teach one last time with me and open it up on Zoom. He won't do it again. He's pretty busy. So just to let you know that that's coming up in April. And there are 6 modules, Wednesday mornings, an hour and a half to 2 hours. The first one's 2 hours, the rest is an hour and a half, where we're going to really, the first one is that whole theory of change piece, how you can do that yourself. Team evaluation instruments, people with lived experience evaluation instruments, in your case, older adults. The measuring belonging change, that's where you will give the templates of the different interview questions so they can be customized to your own cultural context. How to synthesize the findings in the final report, how to embed the strategic reflective practices and change effort initiatives. So what we're trying to do is one and you're done. So at the end, you'll have your own people that join evaluation toolkit. And we also added a few bonuses. So at the end, anyone who wants to have a 30-minute call with me to review their tools will do that. And also a self-paced module, how to create a powerful challenge statement, which is so key in any change effort to get high engagement and momentum kind of building. So there will be, all of it is recorded and people can access the course afterwards for up to a year, as well as show up to the live Zoom calls. So there will be a follow-up email because we are offering a 20% discount to anyone working in the older adult sector. So you're welcome, or really connected to our key partners. So United Way, any of your members would be welcome to that. So that is that. So you will get the discount code in the follow-up. If you want more information, that is the website. And do we have time? We have 1 minute left for the word cloud. Olivia, do you think so, or just a chat? Yeah. So did I accidentally? Oh, I see. Okay. Are you taking charge of the chat?
I just screen shared, Jessie, the word cloud question.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Great. Okay.
So Ravi, if you can put the link to Mentimeter in chat again for folks.
And one word, what is the one thing you're leaving with today? And for those that like, you're free to get in touch with me. It's the last slide, but you'll see it in the follow-up. I'm also often on LinkedIn, so that's a good way to message me if there's other questions, and I will follow up with any questions that haven't been addressed so far. I really appreciate all the time everyone is putting into this such important work so that we can be really confident to know what's working and what needs course correcting and create those environments where all older adults feel a sense of connection and belonging. Wonderful. I feel excited too. So thank you so much. Olivia, I'll toss it back to you.
And I'll just leave the word cloud on the screen as folks share their final thoughts. We're at 11 o'clock or 11:01 on my end. So looking to wrap up the webinar now, but a huge shout out and appreciation to Jessie for your time and your wisdom and your insights today. Lots of takeaways, I think, as we all wrestle with what do theory of change models look like in the context of the work we're all leading in the healthy aging space, and what does it look like to embed principle-focused evaluation in some of these frameworks around measuring and assessing our impact and our change efforts in the broader healthy aging space and community. So thank you so much for your time and your thoughts, and also to everyone for being on the call and weighing in with your reflections and your own thoughts and questions as well. As I mentioned at the start, we will be following up with an email with some resources, information about the upcoming course that Jessie mentioned too, and a link to the recording for this webinar that will be posted on our Healthy Aging United Way BC core website. So thank you all for your time, for being here with us today. And we look forward to staying connected and staying in touch in the future. Thanks so much, everyone. Take care.